Hi, this is Ed in San Diego, and it's June 29. In just a few minutes, we're going to have a very special presentation. A guest, Steve Paskoff, is CEO of Eli. Eli, that's E-L-I. I'm going to read this. Eli is a workplace training company that focuses on developing leadership skills and enhancing organizational performance to create a more inclusive and collaborative workplace. Sounds good, doesn't it? We all need that. So Steve and I are going to discuss a lot of things, including how action-based models activate an organization's values to increase DEI efforts and drive organization successes. Also, how HR and company leadership can guarantee the efficiency of their learning initiatives and improve their learning strategies to get better results. Also, how to connect workplace law and regulations to business goals, simultaneously driving DEI change within the organization. Steve has a favorite saying, like many top leaders do. They try to characterize difficult things or large things into slogans and ideas. Talk engages, action changes. Interesting, isn't it? So we're going to discuss what ELI does and what's special to clients from different sectors. So it's about workplace training and continuous learning, helping companies, clients navigate US and global differences when it comes to DEI. This is a difficult topic, and there's a lot of words, but it goes deep. There's compliance issues, regulations everywhere. It's confusing. So we're going to learn about DEI and what is their view of DE&I and how the company utilizes this to drive improved behavioral outcomes. So we're going to be discussing what ways HR and company leadership can guarantee the efficiency of their learning initiatives and improve their learning strategies for better business results. There's a lot here. We'll be right back with Steve Paskoff, and we're going to learn about ELI. They were featured at the recent International SHRM Convention in Vegas, and that's why we're doing this broadcast, to take it further, spread the word. Welcome back to Global TV Talk Show. I'm in San Diego, California. Today is 29 June. It's a momentous day. The U.S. Supreme Court has just announced their affirmative action ruling, and we have an expert with us today, thank God. And here is Steve Paskoff with Eli. What is it? Employment Learning?
Innovations, Employment Learning Innovations, named after my son, whose middle name is Eli.
Oh, cool. Okay, I'm going to read this real brief. Eli is a workplace training company that focuses on developing leadership skills and enhancing organizational performance to create a more inclusive and collaborative workplace. Now, you're an expert, you're an attorney. You gave this wonderful presentation recently at the SHRM International in Vegas, and I am really enthused to have you on our program today. Many of our audience around the world is HR related, within not just Fortune 500 global FT 500, but much smaller organizations, and not just at the C-suite, but throughout. And so I want you to use this rather informal approach with me to reach our audience, to build up your own audience. More than 100,000 will view this eventually across days and weeks and months following today's original broadcast recording. We use LinkedIn groups. I'm very active. We have a very active YouTube channel. Twitter is good for our purposes as well. Anyway, let's get going. Talk to me and the audience about, even though it's really early, the Supreme Court change on affirmative action. They've knocked out something that Harvard and University of North Carolina had implemented. What's the meaningfulness of all this?
Since I'm a lawyer, though I don't practice, I'm going to say it depends, because I have yet to read the decision. But what it has done is to send a message that specifically race-based decision-making is going to run into challenge. This decision involves North Carolina and Harvard, but it's going to be taken and applied and adapted, I suspect, to workplaces that have used affirmative action and or are trying to include in their representation of people from a variety of backgrounds as part of DE&I. How they do it is going to have to be something that every organization looks at to make sure it, yes, at least in terms of the US, it's operating legally, but also not sacrificing its commitment to building diverse, equitable / fair and inclusive workplace environments. Both need to be managed, and they can.
Okay, now originally, going back in history now, affirmative action was started to get more Blacks and others into colleges at the top level, and to ensure that. And then it grew and became institutionalized. And so the conservative element, and I haven't read the thing either, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a PR guy. But the conservative elements in the US, particularly in legal circles, want to narrow the meaning of it. I'm not sure they want to kill it, but they want to narrow it so they have more say, more control, I think. Am I wrong?
Well, I've got to read it, but
Yeah.
if I can, let me go back in time as you did and talk about affirmative action in our workplaces and how that started. How's that work? All right?
Yeah, great. Perfect.
Okay. When I got into this area in 1974, while in law school, I was an investigator, then later a trial attorney with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I literally investigated and helped litigate cases of individual and systemic discrimination. Systemic discrimination meant that even though the law had been passed in 64, still into 74 and sometimes beyond in some areas now too, in the US, there are companies that, for example, would not put African Americans or females or other groups into certain jobs, or would restrict industrially lines of progression with what were considered standards that were fair, but excluded people disproportionately in a way that didn't reflect what they could actually do. It kept them out of high-paying jobs and opportunities. Affirmative action was designed to correct those patterns and say, we want to make sure that you organizations that are government contractors, because that's where affirmative action started in our workplaces anyway, that you, if you're going to contract with us, will take steps to make sure that your selection and results don't discriminate against groups that have traditionally been discriminated against. African Americans, people of different ethnicities, and females. That's what the initial focus was about. And affirmative action was supposed to make sure that you hired in the requisite way linked to availability, and the decisions were made fairly.
So one of your slogans here is talk engages, action changes. from words to lasting workplace inclusion. There's a lot of words, but I love the slogan, talk engages, action changes. So
well,
now
I'll have one or two more for you.
Oh,
But let me-
please. Yeah, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. So talk engages means you and I can talk about stuff all we want. And that's what often happens. The talk, we're inspired, but unless it's followed by action reflecting the purpose of the talk, it's good talk, and that's about it. But in the area of treating people fairly, there is a lot of talk, but it's taking action, commitments to the way you hire people, select people, treat them on the job, not just at the HR level, not just at the entry point, but on the job as colleagues and team members. That is the action that drives you to the result. That's what's often missing. That's why there are problems. That's why you see organizations say, we won't deal or tolerate sexual harassment. And tomorrow, whenever tomorrow is, your listeners will likely hear instances where someone was sexually harassed. They'd heard the talk, it wasn't supported by action, they kept doing it, as an example.
Okay, so DE&I, again, I'm just asking the question from a know-nothing point of view here. Is DEI a straight line from the affirmative action from years ago?
It's hard to say it's a straight line, but I think it was derived from recognition that having laws is important. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. DE&I, to me anyway, stands for the idea that if you want to get the best talent, you should be looking all over the available workforce, wherever people are from, whatever their backgrounds, but you're looking for talent and you're not excluding them because, well, you didn't live in this neighborhood or you didn't live in this school area, whatever. Equity is under some debate, I must say. I'll give you what my definition is, which I believe is the original intent and also lawful. We are going to make the business decisions fairly and consistently to everyone, not just one group, but to everyone. And organizations that have values of fairness and inclusion, which I'll speak about in a minute, that's part of what they want. Inclusion means we're not just going to hire people and say, we're there, we satisfied a numerical quota. And quite frankly, in the 70s and in the early 80s, I saw that being done. We've got people here, but they're not really included in a collegial way, which is to me the essence of inclusion. It's not just saying the right things. It's not just pictures. It's not just posters. It's how do we treat people in meetings? Do we talk to them? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm too busy to hear from you. Good idea, but anybody else? Dismissive stuff like that basically communicates you are really not important. You're here, but if you're not participating, you're air in the chair, and no one gets betterment from that.
So every company is different, where they're from, what they do, the people involved. So the people who are, let's say, at the top, or the people who have the responsibility to know what needs to be done, are sometimes different from the people who are given the orders, the task to make changes. There's a gap, right? And what your company does is train the trainers.
Well, let me say this. Originally, the company was started out with this core. There are core behaviors that cause legal liability. Let's address those. Over time, we've realized that there are behaviors that may not be illegal, but they lead to illegality. And whether they lead to illegality or not, they prevent you from getting, retaining, and advancing the best talent. They interfere with results and they increase risk. So we try to address all of that through an ongoing system of learning. Now, what you're talking about is we have leaders at the very top who may say the right things. And that's great. But that message has got to percolate throughout the organization. And quite frankly, That's an area that doesn't happen the way that it should. Now, if you take the position, and this is the argument we make to advance learning, is that having the best talent wherever they're from improves results for everybody. And people will recognize it if they're asked certain ways. And that means it really should be applied to everyone. And that means it's important to frontline leaders in their teams, not just the people at the top. So if you're, for example, dealing with airline security, as I recently did, and talked to a leader there, and I said, don't you want to have the best person at the gate entry looking to make sure that they're alertly looking for contraband or weapons or harm? You want them speaking up, participating collegially, and not either A, lacking the skills or abilities, or not being comfortable speaking up about that. Do you? That's the argument for DEI. We want the best talent actively engaged. And I said to them, I don't want to get on one of those planes when somebody doesn't have the best talent. I want you to look for the best talent wherever you can find them, but engage them and make sure they're listened to as full members of the team. That means something to me as a passenger. It means something to you in your mission and responsibility in the jobs you do.
Thank you for that. I'm understanding and learning a lot from you and from preparing for this talk with you. Yeah, in your papers here, I read that the issue of credibility, your credibility, the program's credibility is really paramount to you. So, and you cite some examples. I mean, I'd like to ask you to go a little bit deeper. I know we have limited time here, but UPS, EEOC, Coca-Cola, other high-profile situations. Would you like to pick one or just bring it to the forefront here for our audience?
I can give you quick summaries on each of the three you mentioned. Coca-Cola was in the early 2000s. It was the largest employment discrimination suit of its time. And we were brought in to help them. And our work was approved by the federal district court in 2000. I'd have to get the year for you and I can't, but it was in the early 2000s. So we worked with them to help them resolve that major case. That's one. More recently, we were recognized by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in 2016 in their report on harassment and related discrimination issues as helping to resolve, or excuse me, reduce instances of discrimination in the federal government. That was their finding, their comment, and the report is still available. Then you mentioned UPS. UPS brought in an extraordinarily talented CEO and leadership team and wanted to address the issues that we're talking about, focusing on linking performance and behavior to their mission, their values, and serving their constituents, one another, in the public the best way they could. We were brought in the midst of COVID, so we couldn't train those folks face to face as we often do. We trained roughly 30,000 people virtually and got extraordinarily high ratings across that whole platform. Perhaps one of the highest, if not the highest, results from any similar training that I recall they had done.
What did you do that, if you remember, using Zoom or whatever, what specific item stands out that you think enabled or promoted that high rating?
Well, first of all, I wish I could say it's only the training. The training is critical. You started with, how did you do it on Zoom? We're on Zoom right now from one of the studios we used. And first, we'd been working on it for the last or prior 8 to 10 years. We saw it coming. It just accelerated. So we have a producer here, China Wilson, my colleague, who is managing the flow. We make sure that we have it all set up, but then it's got to be interactive. If in the course we can ask questions of 25 people, can't really do it as effectively with a huge audience. But if you want to have a simulation of a cross-examination, for example, we could do it. Isn't that true, Mr. Cohen? We can do things like that. We keep them engaged and we have simple core behavioral values. But again, having leadership support is vital. Having leaders say, this isn't just something we want you to sit through. It's something we want you to absorb. And what the thing that we want to talk to you about is sometimes what we refer to ourselves as doing is training. Other people do too. But here's something to think about. Training is delivered. Learning is applied. Our mission is not just to deliver training, but to make sure the learning is applied and that it sticks. That's how you change culture. And that's what we're working on.
Yeah. So did you have a polling device? How are we doing? Is this clear? Let me ask you a question. Choose one or two. Item one, item two. Does this describe what you just heard us talk about? And that way you have instant feedback?
We had instant feedback all during the class through the participation. And we also had surveys that we got from about 25,000 people.
Perfect. Well, congratulations.
During the delivery. Thank you.
Yeah, I love Zoom. It's so easy to work. And yet I don't do everything that I just said, but I see that you did. I'm going to learn from you. So let's talk more about your mission, Eli's mission. Today, things are swirling fast. It feels like the earth is spinning faster, doesn't it? There's so much going on. So how are you going to adjust? I know it's too early to go into details, but one of the things I read here is activating values to build and reinforce cultures to help better organizational results, reducing risks. That's a lot of words, but what you're trying to do is communicate what needs to be done, what should be done, and start doing it. And we're going to help you.
Can I give you a little history?
Please.
The history is, as I said, the first thing I started with was I wanted to make sure that people complied with the law, both as a defendant's lawyer and my early groundwork and commitment as a government lawyer. It means a lot. So I started focusing on legal issues, having core behavioral rules that we still do. And I learned it was not enough. We had episodes that changed my life. One was a nuclear power company where it wasn't a discrimination per se issue that I was asked to deal with, but it was people who were, take some water for a moment, if you don't mind, Ed.
Yeah, me too. I'll do it right here.
And it was people who were not willing to speak up about operational issues, including nuclear safety hazards. It wasn't necessarily that they were being treated illegally. There was some of that, but it was also leaders and other team members who would be dismissive, unwelcoming, abusive, or not appreciating people from different backgrounds, as we would think of diversity in a variety of ways. And I thought this could lead to a catastrophic event. Think of events where people know problems and don't speak up or aren't listened to and are afraid to speak up. It's one thing. Then I worked with a hospital whose name we never identified, but I promise you've heard of it. I worked with a group of cardiac surgeons, some of the tops in the world. Their problem was their behavior was they were abusive. They would scream, swear, threaten, sometimes insult, maybe not going up the line of illegality. But here's what happened in that OR, people couldn't focus 100%. And there were people who wouldn't work for these doctors. There were anesthesiologists who had this struggle. Should I speak up or wait until the surgeon sees it? Because it'll be less disruptive. In cardiac surgery and another surgery, there's evidence now that when people are treated dismissively, abusively, or excluded, it can be cause of mortality, complications, and bad results. So what we've evolved over the years to do is to say we've got to address issues at the top of a pyramid, illegal, necessary, but not sufficient. The other kinds of behaviors I mentioned. How do you do it? You need to have a leverage point to get people focused. And their own values talk about just about every organization, fairness or inclusion or respect or honesty or collaborative, honesty or collaborative. What we're trying to do is to take those values, use core behaviors, and get people to understand that it matters to the organization and to them to modify their behavior to get the best results and reduce risk, not just legal, but operational, productive, and even financial results.
So I'm reading here, helping clients and applying their own mission, vision, and values in line with Eli's work and consultative services in order to change a culture and improve results. That's exactly what you're saying now.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And
so first of all, you have to study what that culture is, and then notice what's wrong, and you have to do interviews. And boy, that could cause disruption while you're doing that.
And I've seen it.
Yeah,
I've seen it, but I'll give you your listener, your viewers, a hint. 3 things are really, really important. One thing is that in this area, we often think about, we've got to get people to understand the standards. They need to understand how they're supposed to behave towards one another. When you think of crises of the highest order, of the way people treat one another, in diversity, in other areas, can you think of one example where the person who was fired or let go said, I didn't know there was anything wrong with that? It's not a lack of knowledge, which is the core issue. It's easy to tell people, don't do this, 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 and this. Just as it's easy to say, as was said thousands of years ago, supposedly, and I'm not trying to single out any religious group, but 10 Commandments, tell them what it is. If people just listen to it, there wouldn't be murder, there wouldn't be adultery, there wouldn't be any of those other issues either. It's not a lack of knowledge. What's the problem? The problem is, in more normal circumstances or right now, is people see problems and either keep quiet about them or afraid to report them. So getting people to speak up and say, did you know what so-and-so did? The third problem goes back to executive leadership responsibility. People hear about and learn about things and say, look, this person's a big producer. They've always been this way. This is just the way we operate. And they fail and are unwilling to take responsibility for action. So you've really got to address all 3. And it's got to be done with purpose and planning to not just communicate information, but to have a commitment to addressing those 3 populations and make it part of the job.
So you're talking about changing habits, the culture of a company, and that means the people. And boy, that takes expertise. You have to bring in at least one consultant, psychologist who can interpret what needs to be done and say it in a way that doesn't get people upset and then become blocks to what you need to achieve.
This is not my quote. It's a quote I heard, but it's hearsay. I wasn't there, but I'll tell you what I heard. It comes from a executive from a large based company where I live in Atlanta. He was asked the same question, and I'll be extraordinarily blunt and then explain it. He said, how are you going to deal with just the things you asked about, Ed? And here's what he said: I'll change people, or I'll change people. Now, here's what that meant. If it's really important, you've got to get people to change. Or if they fail to change and it's really important, there have to be consequences. Otherwise, people won't change. So people change because they choose to, they're required to, or they don't change. What do you want? Now, let me ask you a question. When was the last time you can recall? You travel a bit, is that correct?
I used to.
Well, you've traveled occasionally now, right?
Yeah.
All right. When was the last time you ran to the airport and ran right to the gate because your plane was late? When was the last time that ever happened, do you think?
Because the plane was late or because I was late?
You're late.
Yeah. So so we're talking about going through TSA and everything, right? Yeah. It probably happened 3.5 years ago in Chicago.
I don't think so. I don't think so. because TSA would not let you or anyone else just run through security without
Right.
being checked, without being screened. It wouldn't happen. I'm going to guess, unless you have skills and talents I don't even know about it, that it was some point prior to September 11th, 2001. And overnight, people changed their habit.
Yeah.
Why? Because they had to. Now, that's an example.
Mm.
But everybody used to run to the airport, and I'm going to get on the plane. And I used to know and be practiced with a lawyer who said, if I don't miss a plane a year, I'm wasting time. Because he would run to the airplane. That changed immediately.
Thank you. Okay. Changing habits. Okay. So let's see. I'm going to read this. We need to affect, this is you speaking, those who need to know all the standards and what to do and not to do in multiple issues. Those who become aware of possible or obvious problems, and those who have the responsibility to correct them. Now, that's oftentimes parallel lines, right? Rather than effective cooperation.
Well, it's just to say, look, we're not going to make people perfect. Not in our lifetime, not anybody I know. But we can prevent the bad habits as best we can, and then make sure that we set an environment where people will report it, speak up, and the leaders at whatever level can be trusted to act to deal with the investigation, to investigate the issues.
Yeah.
And solve them.
One of your quotes here is that you're going to have different cultures within your workplace, but everyone should see themselves as a citizen to the organization.
Yes. Here's the point. People tend, and there's an article in major publication based in Manhattan that came out today, talking about how people tend to find commonality with people like them. Okay, when you go to work, everyone who goes and works in an organization should be able to consider themselves as citizens of the organization. They have something in common. That is, they are responsible for, in their way, adhering to mission, vision, and fulfilling the organization's values. That should bring them together, as should common standards of basic behavior, the three kinds of things that I talked about. Too often what we do is we focus on what divides us rather than starting with what connects us and learning to appreciate differences, even as we share so much every single day. That's the point.
You say, make it matter, make it simple, and make it stick.
Learning learning matters to me, learning matters to China. That's not good enough. It's got to matter to the person who learns. How do you make it matter? You make it important to them, saying there are rules here that apply, and they apply. You've got to say to them, Ed, Steve, this will help us get the results, and I'll prove it to you. Not in an abstract way, but what will make it better if in our team, if we had the best talent, we could look anywhere for it from any group and reach people we're not reaching. What will happen to us when they're fully participating, not just as if they're computers that you buy and you never use, they're not even plugged in, and speaking up. And what'll happen? You've got to get that. That's make it matter. Make it simple. I'm a lawyer. How many cases have I cited in the last 30 minutes? 0. It's about behavior and culture. And even when you're talking about legal terms, the idea is not to train on the law, but to focus on behavior and make it stick. You cannot change behaviors and habits, because that's what discrimination are. They're habits and behaviors. It's got to be something that occurs in more than a class. It's got to be carried back, as you suggested, onto the job by frontline leaders who talk about these issues, not like lawyers, not like HR professionals, not like compliance people or learning and development specialists, but hey, Steve, we got Ed here. We got to work more closely to have a better team. That's what makes us better. Got it? Here's what that means. Don't interrupt him. Look at him when he talks. He's one of us. Got it? Leaders have to do it. It can't be something you just learn in a class. It's got to be demonstrated, illustrated, and practiced by leaders and team members alike.
So in my case, I would need remedial help. So that means extra care for somebody like me. And so from your experience, I'm going to change the subject here quickly, but from your experience recently at SHRM in Vegas, in this session that you did, and from the experience in the exhibit hall, I assume you found it useful and productive.
I'm writing an article about it now, and I did, but I'll tell you what I wrote about. I'm writing about it right now, over the weekend. What really struck me at SHRM is this: there were 23,000 people there.
Amazing.
Bigger than it's been. And I've been to SHRM national conferences as a speaker since the mid-90s. And I think this was probably the biggest one for the 75th anniversary. But what struck me and I wrote about is, first, few masks. Big difference over the last 4 years. And there seemed to be a sense of joy and exuberance, not just because it was in Las Vegas, because there's gambling or great food and entertainment, but I think that people were really excited about sharing their experiences over the last several years, because they haven't had a conference like that for a long, long time, even though this, I think, was one of the largest, if not the largest. And they liked sharing it with their colleagues and listening to learnings from them. And what I wrote about last night, Ed, is what struck me is the commonality of being in the same HR tribe, because they're very diverse, but they're in the same tribe dealing with people issues and people problems. That brought them together. That's the same idea of workplace tribalism or culture that you can use broadly with mission, vision, and values. So they're not just words on a page where people say, oh, let me check them out. Yeah, those are our values. That happens.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Eli, for being on Global TV Talk Show. It's been a really strong learning experience for me. And the way you explain these technical issues is very clear. And obviously, there's a need for a lot of training and a lot of details. Would you please recite clearly to the audience the website and how to reach you?
www.ELIINC.com.
That's it.
How's that?
Yeah, that's clear. Clear as a bell. Yeah.
And
okay.
If you want to email me, it's Paskoff, Paskoff. My name's at the bottom, at ELIINC.com.
And this is Ed, ED. Okay, thank you, Steve. And please come back to Global TV Talk Show sometime. I'm going to do a review of this show and put it up into the studio during my day-to-day, and then I'll send it back to you guys, and before I go public with it. So thank you very much. You take care.
Thank you, Ed. Great time. Love to talk to you again.
Please. Thank you.